I am Nick Bolton, the founder of ICCS, and following on from my last video in which we looked at the overview of the seven-eyed model, I said I'd go through each of the lenses one by one, and in this video we're going to take a look at I1. Now I1, if you recall from that video, was the client experience. So this is really about the most central figure in the whole coaching journey, which is of course the client. And yet so often in supervision, if we don't consciously think about the client, they can be left out in the cold somewhere with all the focus going on the coach. Sometimes with the focus going on who's the sponsor, but often forgetting there's a human being that's come to coaching with aspirations and hopes and fears and anxieties and really wanted to get something from coaching. So in this video, we're going to take a quick look at what is I1, how is it used, what are some of the skills required to be effective at looking through the I1 lens? Also, so what are some of the challenges and what are some examples of what that might look like? So just to clarify, I1 is the client experience in which we metaphorically bring the client into the room in order to be able to say what's going on for them. Now, that's not to say that we necessarily interrogate them in a kind of Gestalt chairs way. We can also talk about that in the abstract, but there's still very much a living, breathing person in our conversation. And this is often one of the most important things we can do in supervision is say, well, actually, who is this coaching about? Who is it affecting? What do they come to coaching for? What do they want to achieve? Are they getting what they wanted to achieve? And if not, why not? And what's the impact of the coaching that's been done so far? All of that is beginning to look at the coaching from the experience and the perspective of the client, as opposed to the coach. You know, the coach might be thinking, I'm loving the coaching. It's great. I really enjoy it. Okay. But what's the client's experience? And so we're making sure we bring the client into the room. Now, one of the best things we can do when it comes to that is simply be very phenomenological about this. We can ask the coach to describe the client in some way, to make us understand who they are. What do they look like? I don't mean physically look like, but what they exude in the coaching. Do they look downbeat? Are they excited? Do they talk a lot? Are they very reticent? Like, what is the client's physical, emotional, behavioral appearance in the coaching space? How do they show up? Because that could be a good indicator that things are off track or things are beautifully on track. No, we don't know because the client's not in the room talking to us, but it's the nearest we can have of their understanding is at least getting the coach's sense of it. So one of the things we can do then is bring them into the room, but then what do we do? Well, we can find out what does the coach think is going on for them? What do they imagine is going on for them? What do they know they wanted and what do they think they're getting? Those are two very different things. Now, once we as a supervisor know what they wanted to get, we can start to explore to what extent are they getting that? Where's the evidence that they're getting that? What's the coach said that indicates they're getting that? What are the outcomes been so far? Do they seem to be on track? Does the coach seem to be purposeful in supporting the client to get what they want? But also, what's the experience seem to be from the way the coach perceives it? How does the client seem to be experiencing the coaching? Do they leave saying that was fantastic? Or do they have this kind of like, this isn't quite what I expected? And it's surprising how often, and delightfully so, I'm happy to say, that coaches are very open in sharing these concerns and these experiences. You know, the client doesn't seem to be very happy. Is a great starting point for saying, well, what would need to change in that case? Is it about the coaching or is it about something else? So either way, we now have some sense of what does the client actually say they want and how do they seem to be experiencing it. We can't see into the brains. We can't really know what they're experiencing, but we can have a flavor of it from what the coach senses. Now, what might this look like in practice? Well, let's imagine that as you're supervising somebody, the impression you get is that there's a kind of stuckness in the system. There's something that's slowing down progress. The coach doesn't feel very happy with what's going on. They feel like it's stodgy and the client isn't making progress. Or we can go back to what the client wanted. And that's not the same, by the way, as the contract, although the contract is certainly part of it. But what did they emotionally want from the coaching? What did they, when they first came into the coaching, when they first did the consultation, when they first did the contract, when they first had session number one, what were they hoping for? How do they articulate the outcome they were seeking? And with what quality did they articulate it? Did they articulate it with a sense of almost regret that they had to look at this thing? Like, oh, I'm not feeling happy about this, so I really got to figure it out? Or did they have some excitement? Like, I really want to achieve this thing. Either way, those are the way the client showed up that we can start to explore. Well, what was it about that excitement that seems to have dissipated? Or what was it about that regret that's not being faced? What was it about the anxiety that's not being surfaced? When we know how the client shows up and showed up originally, we can start to say, well, what might need to shift here? And by the way, as we start to look at what might need to shift, we begin to look at other lenses. What might be the I2 situation, as in what does the coach do? What's the intervention style? But that's for another video. So this is a good example of how a client might need to come into the room when we find that there's some sort of stodginess in the room. There could also be a situation where the coach feels somewhat resistant to what the client wants. Like, I'm not feeling like I'm aligned with the client. Well, okay, let's think about what the client needs from you, what they expect from you. What do they say that seems to be conflicting with you? Because that will then lead us to I3, which is the coach-client relationship. And you start to see how these eyes begin to blend, because by looking at I1, we say, well, who is that client? And then what's the impact on you, I4? And then how is that manifesting as a relationship, I3? So I1 is a critical piece of the puzzle. If we don't know who the client is, we often miss a lot of information. So what are the skills needed for this? Well, at one basic level, it's going to be classic active listening. It's going to be noticing, picking up the vibe of what the coach is saying about the client. Do they speak about the client in a positive sense? Or do they have this kind of, I've got that client again. Occasionally we have these clients in coaching. I was like, it's Wednesday morning. I've got that client again. What's that about? Where is that coming from? So we need to be actively listening so we can then bring the client into the room and say, well, what are they experiencing that's different from what you're thinking? But then we can do somewhat more, let's say, advanced techniques or specific techniques, such as Gestalt chairs. We could ask the client to sit in the mental space of an empty chair, or indeed even in a physical empty chair if you have capacity to do actual chair work. But even sit them in the mental empty chair, the mental space of the empty chair is a fantastic way to say, let's put the client there. When they look at you, what are they hoping for? What are they getting? How do they experience you? How do you show up? What do they notice when you talk to them? What do they think is being unsaid by you? What do they believe you think about them? These are questions that, whilst we don't know the truth, they will at least allow the coach to begin to reflect on the fact that, number one, the client is a completely figural part of this experience, undeniably so, but often easily to forget. Number one, they're part of the experience. And number two, that we can begin to at least pull out the perception that the coach is having, because that perception will impact the way they work. If we think the client doesn't like us, it will impact the way we work with them. Perhaps it's got nothing to do with what the person thinks about the coach. So we need to bring them into the room. This is all I1 work. Let's get the client in the room. Once we have the client in the room, we can begin to move off into other lenses. In the next video, we're going to take a look at lens 2, or I2, which is what's often called the intervention. We don't really think of intervention in coaching, but it's what is the coach doing? What's being done? What are the models they're using? What's the approach they're using? Perhaps they're coming at it from a particular slant, like a particular school of thought in the coaching world, or perhaps there's a particular model they use, or even just the quality of how they coach. Are they very provocative? Are they strong in their coaching, or are they more gentle? All of these things would be in the scope of I2. So thank you for watching this video, and I'll see you on the next one.